Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Understanding Business, 2024, Chapter 18, narrated by Omar Mohsen Ibrahim Fouad. Chapter 18, Financial Management, page 472, Learning Objectives. After you have read and studied this chapter, you should be able to explain the role and responsibilities of financial managers, outline the financial planning process, and explain the 3 key budgets in the financial plan. Explain why firms need operating funds, identify and describe different sources of short-term financing, identify and describe different sources of long-term financing. Page 473. Getting to know Christine McCarthy, Chief Financial Officer of the Walt Disney Company. Managing a company's finances becomes more complicated as the firm grows larger, and businesses don't get much bigger than the Walt Disney Company. With a market valuation of over $180 billion, generating more than $80 billion in revenue annually, the House of Mouse commands an international empire of theme parks, resort properties, cruise ships, movie studios, streaming services, and many other profitable enterprises. Of course, Disney does not stop there, with Mickey and Company always on the lookout for new ventures to acquire that can increase the reach of this ubiquitous entertainment giant. All these matters of finance fall under the purview of Christine McCarthy, Chief Financial Officer at Disney since 2015. As CFO, she is responsible for overseeing the company's financial operations, including budgeting, accounting, and fiscal reporting. By analyzing data and keeping a close eye on both external and internal trends, McCarthy identifies areas of opportunity as well as potential risks in order to help Disney make strategic decisions. Her input has been pivotal as the company acquired major firms like Pixar in 2006 and the entertainment assets of 2000. Her input has been pivotal as the company acquired major firms like Pixar in 2006 and the entertainment assets of 20th Century Fox in 2019. Just 2 deals among many that have helped build McCarthy's considerable reputation. Decades before she worked for Disney, McCarthy grew up watching the Mickey Mouse Club at her home in the Boston suburb of Wakefield, Massachusetts. She was no couch potato, though. Limited to just half an hour of television per day, McCarthy excelled in school as well as extracurriculars like swimming, running track, and playing the viola. She later enrolled in Smith College, a private liberal arts women college, where she earned a bachelor's degree in biology. She then moved to Los Angeles with plans to work in a lab before pursuing a doctorate in botany. But concerns about her financial future convinced her to pivot to business. One of few women in UCLA's master's program in the late 1970s, McCarthy took inspiration from her time at Smith to speak up in an environment that was often hostile to her presence. "I felt that empowerment," said McCarthy. "You don't win anything by waiting for those to just come along." McCarthy took this attitude with her into the early stages of her career in the banking industry, where she encountered the same sexism she experienced while earning her MBA. "It wasn't really friendly," said McCarthy. "There were so many times when I was the only female in meetings. I could either be subservient and quiet or bold, and the latter was the approach I took." Her determination drove her climb up the corporate ladder as McCarthy rose to executive vice president of finance at the prominent bank before becoming CFO at a major institution in Southern California. Then Disney came calling in 2000, offering McCarthy the position of treasurer. She accepted the position, but 5 months into the job, she was diagnosed with her positive breast cancer. Always intent on going forward no matter what stood in her way, McCarthy continued working during her treatment, eventually sending the cancer into remission while her career marched on. McCarthy's responsibilities at Disney increased over the years, expanding into oversight of the company's real estate holdings as well as procurement, corporate alliances, and partnerships. Her work was essential as Disney expanded throughout the entertainment industry, and in 2015, the company named McCarthy CFO. Months, months after accepting the job, however, she received the bad news that her cancer had come back, requiring McCarthy to once again go through chemotherapy. But just like the last time, she did not let her sickness dampen her resolve. People find their ways to get through tough times, said McCarthy. For me, it was my work and proving to myself and others I was here to stay. You've got to treat challenges as I'm going to win. You're not going to win. I knew I was tough, a survivor, but this was quite the test, and I surprised even myself. After beating cancer for a second time, McCarthy faced another enormous challenge with the coming of COVID-19, which caused Disney to close theme parks, dock cruise ships, and pull movies out of theaters. It was like the faucets of all our businesses turned off, except for a couple, said McCarthy. She led the effort to secure $20 billion from bond markets that allowed the company to fund its operations, a vital injection of cash that ensured Disney would remain intact during the worst of the pandemic. McCarthy will likely continue to face sizable challenges as she supervises Disney's far-reaching finances into the future, but if her career so far has been any indication, she'll be more than up to the task. Risk, opportunity, and uncertainty clearly define the role of financial management. In this chapter, you'll explore the role and critical importance of finance in business. We'll discuss the challenges and the tools top financial managers like Christine McCarthy use to gain financial stability and growth. Sources: George Spencer, The Woman Behind the Mouse, Greek Court Gate, Smith.edu, October 31st, 2022. Cheryl Estrada, Disney CFO Christine McCarthy is at the center of Bob Iger's comeback plan. Fortune.com. November 23rd, 2022. Nina Trentman and Mark Maurer, the Disney CFO who raised concerns about Bob Chapek, has respect on the street. The Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com. November 25th, 2022. Dan Gallagher, Disney's shakeup resets the stage. The Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com, February 8th, 2023. The Walt Disney Company, TheWaltDisneyCompany.com, accessed April 2023. Mike Blake and Reuters and Redux, page 474. Name that company. This giant pharmaceutical company gained acclaim and thanks when it developed a vaccine for the COVID-19 pandemic. In a recent year, its research and development expenditures totaled $11.4 billion. The development of a new product could cost almost $2 billion before it earns any profits. Name that company. Find the answer in the chapter. The role of finance and financial managers, LO 18-1. Explain the role and responsibilities of financial managers. The goal of this chapter is to answer two major questions. What is finance, and what do financial managers do? Finance is the function in a business that acquires funds for the firm and manages them within the firm. Finance activities include preparing budgets, doing cash flow analysis, and planning for the expenditure of funds on such assets as plant, equipment, new technology, and machinery. Financial management is the job of managing a firm's resources to meet its goals and objectives. Without a carefully calculated financial plan and sound financial management, a firm has little chance for survival, regardless of its product or marketing effectiveness. Let's briefly review the roles of accountants and financial managers. We can compare an accountant to a skilled laboratory technician who takes blood samples and other measures of a person's health and writes the findings on a health report. In business, this process is the preparation of financial statements. A financial manager is like the doctor who interprets the report and makes recommendations that will improve the patient's health. In short, financial managers examine financial data prepared by accountants and recommend strategies for improving the financial performance of the firm. Clearly, financial managers can make sound financial decisions only if they understand accounting information. That's why we first examined accounting in Chapter 17. Similarly, since accounting and finance go together like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a good accountant needs to understand finance. In large and medium-sized organizations, both the accounting and finance functions are generally under the control of a chief financial officer, CFO. A CFO is generally the second highest paid person in an organization, and CFOs often advance to the top job of CEO. However, financial management could also be in the hands of a person who serves as company treasurer or vice president of finance. A comptroller is the chief accounting officer. Rick Friedman and Corbis Historical and Getty Images. Michael Miller overhauled the underperforming Goodwill Industries operation in Portland, Oregon. By treating the nonprofit like a for-profit business, he trimmed operating expenses by comparing sales by store, closing weak outlets, and opening new ones in better locations. He also cut distribution costs and began hosting wedding gown sales and other special events. Sales soared from $4 million to over $135 million, eliminating the need for outside funding. Figure 18.1 highlights a financial manager. Figure 18.1 highlights a financial manager's tasks. As you can see, two key responsibilities are to obtain funds and to effectively control the use of those funds. Controlling funds includes managing the firm's cash, credit accounts, accounts receivable, and inventory. Finance is a critical activity in both profit-seeking and non-profit organizations. Page 475, page 18.1. What financial managers do. Auditing, managing taxes, advising top management on financial matters, collecting funds, credit management, controlling funds, funds management, obtaining funds, budgeting, planning. Financial management is important no matter what the firm's size. As you may remember from Chapter 6, financing a small business is essential if the firm expects to survive its important first 5 years. But the need for careful financial management remains a continuing challenge that any business, large or small, must face throughout its existence. This is a lesson many U.S. businesses learned from the financial crisis of 2008. The Great Recession and the COVID-19 shutdown has severely impacted the economy. The value of understanding finance. 3 of the most common reasons a firm fails financially are 1. Undercapitalization, insufficient funds to the start. Undercapitalization, insufficient funds to start the business. 2. Poor control over cash flow. 3. Inadequate expense control. You can see examples of all 3 in the following classic story. 2 friends, Elizabeth Bertani and Pat Sherwood, started a company called Parsley Patch on what can be best described. 2 friends, Elizabeth Bertani and Pat Sherwood, started a company called Parsley Patch on what can best be described as a shoestring budget. It began when Bertani prepared salt-free seasonings for her husband, who was on a no-salt diet. Her friend Sherwood thought the seasonings were good enough to sell. Bertani agreed, and Parsley Patch Inc. was born. The business began with an investment of $5,000 that was rapidly depleted on a logo and label design. Bertani and Sherwood quickly learned about the need for capital. Bertani and Sherwood quickly learned about the need for capital in getting a business going. Eventually, they invested more than $100,000 of their own money to keep the business from being undercapitalized. Everything started well, and hundreds of gourmet shops adopted the product line. But when sales failed to meet expectations, the woman decided the health food market offered more potential because salt-free seasonings were a natural for people with restricted diets. The choice was a good one, so sales soared, approaching $30,000 a month. Still, the company earned no profits. Page 476. Bertani and Sherwood weren't trained in monitoring cash flow or in controlling expenses. In fact, they were told not to worry about costs, and they hadn't. They eventually hired a certified public accountant, CPA, and an experienced financial manager who taught them how to compute the costs of their products and how to control expenses as well as cash moving in and out of the company. Cash flow. Soon, Parsley Patch was earning a comfortable margin on operations that ran close to $1 million a year. Luckily, the two owners were able to turn things around before it was too late. Eventually, they sold the firm to spice and seasonings giant McCormick. Like many other entrepreneurs, if Bertani and Sherwood had understood finance before starting their business, they might have been able to avoid the problems they encountered. The key word here is understood. Financial understanding is crucial to anyone who wants to start a business, invest in stocks and bonds, or create a retirement plan. To put it simply, finance and accounting are two areas everyone in business needs to study and understand. Since we discussed accounting in Chapter 17, let's look more closely at what financial management is all about. What is financial management? Financial managers are responsible for paying the company's bills at the appropriate time and for collecting overdue payments to make sure the company does not lose too much money to bad debts. People or firms that don't pay their bills. Therefore, finance functions such as buying merchandise on credit, accounts payable, and collecting payment from customers' accounts receivable are key components of the financial manager's job. While these functions are vital to all types of businesses, they are particularly critical to small and medium-sized businesses, which typically have smaller cash or credit cushions than large corporations. Ekaterina Goncharova and Moment and Getty Images. Most businesses have predictable day-to-day financial needs, like the need to buy fuel and pay employees. Financial management is the function that helps ensure firms have the funds they need when they need them. What would happen to the company providing the work in this photo if it couldn't buy fuel for its trucks? It's also essential that financial managers stay abreast of changes or opportunities in finance, such as changes in tax law, since taxes represent an outflow of cash from the business. Financial managers must also analyze the tax implications of managerial decisions to help minimize the taxes the business must pay. Usually, a member of the firm's finance department, the internal auditor, also checks the journals, ledgers, and financial statements the accounting department prepares. To make sure all transactions are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, without such audits, accounting statements would be less reliable. Therefore, it is important that internal auditors be objective and critical of any improprieties or deficiencies noted in their Therefore, it is important that internal auditors be objective and critical of any improprieties or deficiencies noted in their evaluation. Through internal audits, assist the firm in financial planning, which we'll look at next. Financial planning, LO 18-2. Outline the financial planning process and explain the 3 key budgets in the financial plan. Financial planning means analyzing short-term and long-term money flows to and from the firm. Its overall objective is to optimize the firm's profitability and make the best use of its money. It has 3 steps. 1. Forecasting the firm's short-term and long-term financial needs. 2. Developing budgets to meet those needs. And 3. Establishing financial controls to see whether the company is achieving its goals. See Figure 18.2. Let's look at each step and the role it plays in improving the organization's financial health. Page 477, Figure 18.2, Financial Planning. Note the close link between financial planning and budgeting. Financial plan, operating master budget, financial controls. Financial plan branches off to operating master budget, to cash budget, to capital budget, short-term forecasting and long-term forecasting branch off to financial plan, and financial controls branches off to financial plan. McGraw-Hill Connect, I see it, need help understanding the key aspects of financial planning. Click on the video for a brief animated explanation. Forecasting financial needs. Forecasting is an important part of any firm's financial plan. A short-term forecast predicts revenues, costs, and expenses for a period of 1 year or less. Part of the short-term forecast may be a cash flow forecast, which predicts the cash inflows and outflows in future periods, usually months or quarters. The inflows and outflows of cash recorded in the cash flow forecast are based on the inflows and outflows of cash recorded in the float. The inflows and outflows of cash recorded in the cash flow forecast are based on expected sales, revenues, and various costs and expenses incurred, as well as when they are due for payment. The company's sales forecast estimates projected sales for a particular period. A business often uses information from its past financial statements as a basis for projecting expected sales and various costs and expenses. A long-term forecast predicts revenues, costs, and expenses for a period longer than 1 year, sometimes as long as 5 years. This forecast plays a crucial part in the company's long-term strategic plan, which asks questions such as, what business are we in? Should we be in it 5 years from now? How much money should we invest in technology and new plant and equipment over the next decade? Will we have cash available to meet long-term obligations? Innovations in web-based software help financial managers address these long-term forecast questions. The long-term financial forecast gives top management, as well as operations managers, some sense of the income or profit potential of different strategic plans. It also helps in preparing company budgets. Working with the budget process, a budget sets forth management expectations for revenues and, on the basis of those expectations, allocates the use of specific resources throughout the firm. As a financial plan, it depends heavily on the accuracy of the firm's balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows, and short-term and long-term financial forecasts, which all need to be as accurate as possible. To effectively prepare budgets, financial managers must take their forecasting responsibilities serious. A budget becomes the primary guide for the firm's financial operations and expected financial goals. A budget becomes the primary guide for the firm's financial operations and expected financial needs. Page 478. There are usually several types of budgets in a firm's financial plan. 3 of the most common are a capital budget, a cash budget, an operating or master budget. Let's look at each. A capital budget forecasts a firm's spending plans for major asset purchases that often require large sums of money, like property, buildings, and equipment. A cash budget estimates cash inflows and outflows during a particular period, like a month or a quarter. It helps managers anticipate borrowing needs, debt repayment, operating expenses, and short-term investments, and is often the last budget prepared. A sample cash budget for our restaurant example, Harvest Gold, is provided in Figure 18.3. Figure 18.3, a sample cash budget for Harvest Gold. Harvest Gold monthly cash budget. Harvest Gold monthly cash budget, January, February, March. The operating or master budget is an aggregate. The operating or master budget is an aggregate of the firm's. The operating or master budget is an aggregate of the firm's other budgets and summarizes its proposed financial activities. More formally, it is presented to all the company's managers and estimates the costs and expenses needed to run the business. Given all projected revenues, the firm's spending on supplies, travel, rent, technology, advertising, and salaries is determined in the operating budget. Generally, most detailed budget a firm prepares. Financial planning obviously plays an important role in the firm's operations and often determines what long-term investments it makes, when it will need specific funds, and how it will generate them. Once a company forecasts its short-term and long-term financial needs and compiles budgets to show how it will allocate funds, the final step Once a company forecasts its short-term and long-term financial needs and compiles budgets to show how it will allocate funds, the final step in financial planning is to establish financial controls. Before we talk about those, however, Figure 18.4 challenges you to check your personal financial planning skill by developing a monthly budget for you, INC. Page 479. Figure 18.4, you incorporated monthly budget. In Chapter 17, you compiled a sample balance sheet for you, INC. Now let's develop a monthly budget for you, INC. Be honest and think of everything that needs to be included for an accurate monthly budget for you. Expected actual difference. Monthly income, wages, net pay, after taxes, several account withdrawal, savings account withdrawal, family support, loans, other sources, total monthly income, monthly expenses, fixed expenses, rent or mortgage, car payment, health insurance, life insurance, tuition or fees, other fixed expenses, subtotal of fixed expenses, various expenses, food, clothing, entertainment, transportation, cell phone, utilities, publications, internet connection, cable television, other expenses, subtotal of variable expenses, total expenses, total income, total expenses, cash on hand, cash deficit. Establishing financial controls. Financial control is a process in which a firm periodically compares its actual revenues, costs, and expenses with its budget. Most companies hold at least monthly financial reviews as a way to ensure financial control. Such control procedures help managers identify variances to the financial plan and allow them to take corrective action if necessary. Financial control also helps reveal which specific accounts, departments, and people are varying from the financial plan. Financial managers can judge whether these variances are legitimate and thereby merit adjustments to the plan. Shifts in the economy, natural disasters, or volatility in global markets can also alter financial plans. For example, a slowdown in the U.S. housing market, rising inflation, and unexpected events like the war in Ukraine caused many companies to adjust their financial plans. The shutdown of semiconductor manufacturers during the COVID-19 pandemic caused severe shortages of needed microchips in the automobile industry and tech companies, causing them to lower financial expectations. After the test prep, we'll see why firms need readily available funds. Page 480, test prep. Name 3 finance functions important to the firm's overall operations and performance. What 3 primary financial problems cause firms to fail? How do short-term and long-term financial forecasts differ? What is the purpose of preparing budgets in an organization? Can you identify 3 different types of budgets? The need for operating funds. LO 18-3, explain why firms need operating funds. In business, the need for operating funds never seems to end. That's why sound financial management is essential to all businesses. And like our personal financial needs, the capital needs of a business change over time. Remember the classic example of parsley patch to see why a small business's financial requirements can shift considerably. The same is true for large corporations such as Ford, Johnson & Johnson, and Nike when they venture into new product areas or new markets. Virtually all organizations have operational needs for which they need funds. Key areas include managing day-to-day needs of the business, controlling credit operations, acquiring needed inventory, making capital expenditures. Let's look carefully at the financial needs of these key areas, which affect both the smallest of businesses like Parsley Patch and the largest of businesses like Boeing. Managing managing day by day needs of the business. Managing day by day needs of the business. If workers expect to be paid on Friday, they don't want to wait until Monday for their paychecks. If tax payments are due on the 15th of the month, the government expects the money on time. If the interest payment on a business loan is due on the 30th of this month, the lender doesn't mean the first of next month. As you can see, funds have to be available to meet the daily operational costs of the business. Financial managers must ensure that funds are available to meet daily cash needs without compromising the firm's opportunities to invest money for its future. Money has a time value. In other words, if someone offered you money has a time value. In other words, if someone offered to give you $200, money has a time value. In other words, if someone offered to give you $200 either today or 1 year from today, you would benefit by taking the $200 today. Why? It's very simple. You could invest the $200 you receive today, and over a year's time, it would grow. The same is true in business. The interest a firm gains on its investments is important in maximizing the profit it will gain. That's why financial managers often try to minimize cash expenditures to free up funds for investment in interest-bearing accounts. They suggest the company pay its bills as late as possible, unless a cash discount is available for early payment. They also advise companies to try to collect what's owed them as fast as possible to maximize the investment potential of the firm's funds. Unfortunately, collecting funds as fast as possible can be particularly challenging, especially during times when the economy slows down. Efficient cash management is particularly important to small firms since their access to capital is much more limited than larger businesses. Page 481. Ekaterina Meneva and Shutterstock. It's difficult to think of a business that doesn't make credit available to its customers. However, collecting accounts receivable can be time-consuming and expensive. It's difficult to think of a business that doesn't make credit available to its customers. However, collecting accounts receivable can be time-consuming and expensive. Accepting credit cards such as Visa, MasterCard, and American Express can simplify transactions for sellers and guarantee payment. What types of products do you regularly purchase with a credit card? Controlling credit operations. Financial managers know that in today's highly competitive business environment, making credit available helps keep current customers happy and helps attract new ones. Credit for customers can be especially important during tough financial times, as was the case during the inflationary period in 2023 when lenders were hesitant to make loans. The problem with selling on credit is that as much as 25% of the business's assets could be tied up in its credit accounts receivable. The problem with selling on credit is that as much as 25% of the business's assets could be tied up in its credit accounts, which is also known as accounts receivable. This forces the firm to use its own funds to pay for goods or services sold to customers who bought on credit. Financial managers in such firms often develop efficient collection procedures like offering cash or quantity discounts to buyers who pay their accounts by a certain time. They also scrutinize old and new customers to see whether they have a history of meeting credit obligations on time. One convenient way to decrease the time and expense of collecting accounts receivable is to accept bank credit cards such as MasterCard or Visa. The banks that issue these cards have already established the customer's creditworthiness and are responsible for collections. which reduces the business's risk. Businesses must pay a fee to accept credit cards, but the costs are usually offset by the benefits. In an effort to reduce those credit card costs as well as speed up the transaction process, many businesses today accept mobile payments through services like Apple Pay and Android Pay. For example, restaurants, supermarkets, and hotels have invested in mobile payment systems. Mobile payment systems not only make transactions quick and simple, the processors usually charge lower fees than traditional credit card companies. Acquiring needed inventory, as we saw in Chapter 13, effective marketing requires focusing on the customer and providing high quality service and readily available goods. A carefully constructed inventory policy helps manage the firm's available funds and maximize profitability. Doozle's, an ice cream parlor in St. Louis, Missouri, deliberately ties up fewer funds in its inventory of ice cream in winter. It's obvious why demand for ice cream is lower in winter in the Midwest. Just-in-time inventory control, see Chapter 9, and other such methods can reduce the funds a firm must tie up in inventory. Carefully evaluating its inventory turnover ratio, see Chapter 17, can also help a firm control the outflow of cash for inventory. A business of any size must understand that poorly managed inventory can seriously affect cash flow and drain its finances dry. The Making Ethical Decisions box raises an interesting question about sound financial management and inventory control in a critical industry. Making capital expenditures. Capital expenditures are major investments in either tangible long-term assets such as land, buildings, and equipment, or intangible assets. Capital expenditures are major investments in either tangible long-term assets such as land, buildings, and equipment, or intangible assets such as patents, trademarks, and copyrights. In many organizations, the purchase of major assets such as land for future expansion, manufacturing plants to increase production capabilities, research to develop new product ideas, and equipment to maintain or exceed current levels of output is essential. Expanding into new markets, however, can be expensive with no guarantee of success. Therefore, it's critical that companies weigh all possible options before committing a large portion of available resources. Page 482, Making Ethical Decisions. Not what the doctor ordered. After earning your business degree, you are hired as a hospital administrator at a small rural hospital. Having studied finance, you know that efficient cash management is important to all firms in all industries to meet the day-by-day operations. One way to ensure efficiency is to use a carefully planned and managed inventory system that reduces the amount of cash an organization has tied up in inventory. You know that just-in-time inventory is a proven system that helps reduce the cost of managing inventory. At a meeting of the hospital's executive committee, you recommend the hospital save money by using a just-in-time inventory system to manage its drug supply. You suggest particularly discontinuing the hospital's large stockpile of expensive cancer treatment drugs that tie up a great deal of the hospital's cash and order them only when they are needed. Several board members like the idea, but the doctors in charge of the hospital's cancer center are outraged, claiming you are sacrificing patients' well-being for cash flow. After debate, the committee says the decision is up to you. What will you do? What could result from your decision? McGraw-Hill Connect, I see it. Need help understanding equity financing and debt financing? Click on the video for a brief animated explanation. Consider a firm that needs to expand its production capabilities due to increased customer demand. It could buy land and build a new plant, purchase an existing plant, or rent space. Can you think of financial and accounting considerations at play in this decision? The need for operating funds raises several questions for financial managers. How does the firm obtain funds to finance operations and other business needs? Will it require specific funds in the long or the short term? How much will it cost? i.e., important example, interest, to obtain these funds. Will they come from internal or external sources? We address these questions next. Alternative sources of funds. We described finance earlier as the function in a business responsible for acquiring and managing funds. Sound financial management determines the amount of money needed and the most appropriate sources from which to obtain it. A firm can raise needed capital by borrowing money, debt, selling ownership, equity, or earning profits, retained earnings. Debt financing refers to funds raised through various forms of borrowing that must be repaid. Accounting finance is money raised from within the firm, from operations or through the sale of ownership in the firm, stock, or venture capital. Firms can borrow funds, either short-term or long-term. Short-term financing refers to funds needed for a year or less. Long-term financing covers funds needed for more than a year, usually 2 to 10 years. Figure 18.5 highlights reasons why firms may need short-term and long-term funds. Figure 18.5, why firms need funds. Short-term funds, long-term funds. Short-term funds, monthly expenses, unanticipated emergencies, cash flow problems, expansion of current inventory, temporary promotional programs. Long-term funds, new product development, replacement of capital equipment, mergers or acquisitions, expansion into new markets, domestic or global, new facilities. We'll explore the different sources of short and long-term financing next. Let's first pause to check your understanding by doing the test prep. Page 483, test prep. Money has time value. What does this mean? Why is accounts receivable a major financial concern to the firm? What's the primary reason an organization spends a good deal of its available funds on inventory and capital expenditures? What's the difference between debt and equity financing? Obtaining short-term financing, LO 18-4. Identify and describe different sources of short-term financing. The bulk of a financial manager's job does not relate to obtaining long-term funds. In small businesses, for example, long-term financing is often out of the question. Instead, day-to-day operations call for the careful management of short-term financial needs. Firms may need to borrow short-term funds for purchasing additional inventory or for meeting bills that come due unexpectedly. Like an individual, a business, especially a small business, sometimes needs to secure short-term funds when its cash reserves are low. Let's see how it does so. Trade credits. Trade credit is the practice of buying goods or services now and paying for them later. It is the most widely used source of short-term funding, the least expensive and the most convenient. Small businesses rely heavily on trade credit from firms such as United Parcel Service, UPS, as do large firms such as Target or Macy's. When a firm buys merchandise, it receives an invoice, a bill, much like the one you receive when you buy something with a credit card. As you'll see, however, the terms businesses receive are often different from those on your monthly statement. Business invoices often contain terms such as 2/10, net 30. This means the buyer can take a 2% discount for paying the invoice within 10 days. Otherwise, the total bill net is due in 30 days. Financial managers pay close attention to such discounts because they create opportunities to reduce the firm's costs. Think about it for a moment. If the terms are 2/10 net 30, the customer will pay 2% more by waiting an extra 20 days to pay the invoice. If the firm can pay its bill within 10 days, it is needlessly increasing its costs by not doing so. Pogonicki, and Shutterstock. One thing you can never have too much of is cash. Financial managers must make certain there is enough cash available to meet daily financial needs and still have funds to invest in the future. What does it mean when we say cash has a time value? Some suppliers hesitate to give trade credit to an organization with a poor credit rating, no credit history, or a history of slow payment. They may insist the customer sign a promissory note. A written agreement with a promise to pay a supplier a specific sum of money at a definite time. Promissory notes are not as rigid as formal loan contracts and are negotiable. The supplier can sell them to a bank at a discount. The amount of the promissory note less a fee for the bank's services in collecting the amount due, and the business is then responsible for paying the bank. Page 484. Family and friends. As we discussed in Chapter 17, firms often have several bills coming due at the same As we discussed in Chapter 17, firms often have several bills coming due at the same time with no sources of funds to pay them. Many small firms obtain short-term funds by borrowing money from family and friends. Such loans can create problems. However, if all parties do not understand cash flow, that's why it's sometimes better, when possible, to go to a commercial bank that fully understands the business's risk and can help analyze its future financial needs rather than borrow from friends or relatives. Entrepreneurs appear to be listening to this advice, according to the National Federation of Independent Business. Entrepreneurs today are relying less on family and friends as a source of borrowed funds than they have in the past. If an entrepreneur decides to ask family or friends for financial assistance, it's important that both parties, 1, agree to specific loan terms, 2, put the agreement in writing, and 3, arrange for repayment in the same way they would for a bank loan. Such actions help keep family relationships and friendships intact. Commercial banks. Banks, being sensitive to risk, generally prefer to lend short-term money to larger, established businesses. Imagine the different types of business people who go to banks for a loan, and you'll get a better idea of the requests bankers evaluate. Picture, for example, a farmer going to the bank in spring to borrow funds for seed, fertilizer equipment, and other needs that will be repaid after the fall harvest. Or consider a local toy store buying merchandise for Christmas sales. The store borrows the money for such purchases in the summer and plans to buy it back after Christmas. Restaurants often borrow funds at the beginning of the month and pay at the end of the month. How much a business borrows and for how long depends on the kind of business it is and how quickly it can resell the merchandise it purchases with a bank loan or use it to generate funds. In a large business, specialists in a company's finance and accounting departments do a cash flow forecast. Small business owners generally lack such specialists and must monitor cash flow themselves. During difficult economic times, bank loans can virtually disappear even for well organized small businesses. This was certainly the case during the Great Recession and the COVID-19 pandemic when bank loans were practically non existent. That's why it's important for a small firm to remember if it gets a bank loan, the owner or person in charge of finance should keep in close touch with the bank and send regular financial statements to keep the bank up to date on its operations. The bank may spot cash flow problems early or be more willing to lend money in a crisis if the business has established a strong relationship built on trust and sound management. John Kellerman and Alamy stock photo. Did you ever wonder how retail stores get the money to buy all the treasures we splurge on during the holidays? Department stores and other large retailers make extensive use of commercial banks and other lenders to borrow the funds they need to buy merchandise and stock their shelves. How do stores benefit from using this type of financing? Different forms of short-term loans. Commercial banks offer different types of short-term loans. A secured loan is backed by collateral, something valuable such as property. If the borrower fails to pay the loan, the lender may take possession of the collateral. An automobile loan is a secured loan. If the borrower doesn't repay it, the lender will repossess the car. Inventory of raw materials like coal, copper, and steel often serves as collateral for business loans. Collateral removes some of the bank's risk in lending the money. Accounts receivable are company assets often used as collateral for a loan. This process is called pledging and works as follows. A percentage of the value of a firm's accounts receivable pledged usually about 75%, is advanced to the borrowing firm. As customers pay off their accounts, the funds received are forwarded to the lender in repayment of the funds that were advanced. Page 485. An unsecured loan is more difficult to obtain because it doesn't require any collateral. Normally, lenders give unsecured loans only to highly regarded customers, long-standing businesses, or those considered financially stable. If a business develops a strong relationship with a bank, the bank may open a line of credit for the firm. A given amount of unsecured short-term funds a bank will lend to a business, provided the funds are readily available. A line of credit is not guaranteed to a business. However, it speeds up the borrowing process since a firm does not have to apply for a new loan every time it needs funds. As a business matures and becomes more financially secure, banks will often increase its line of credit. If a business is unable to secure a short-term loan from a bank, the financial manager may seek short-term funds from the commercial finance companies. These non-deposit type organizations make short-term loans to borrowers who offer tangible assets like property, plant, and equipment as collateral. Commercial finance companies will often make loans to businesses that cannot get short-term funds elsewhere. Since commercial finance companies assume higher degrees of risk than commercial banks, they usually charge higher interest rates. The Spotlight on Small Business box highlights the challenges small businesses face in securing short-term financing and choosing the best option for their business. Open Spotlight on Small Businesses. Open Spotlight on Small Business. If it sounds too good to be true, be careful. Securing capital is vital for launching or expanding any small business. Even the savviest of entrepreneurs need money to turn their million-dollar ideas into reality. Unfortunately, many small businesses don't qualify for traditional bank or SBA loans. Plus, unexpected events can press a business to need money immediately. Such issues force many entrepreneurs to seek financing from a patchwork of high-cost sources such as factoring or credit cards. It also has led many small businesses to turn to online lenders. Some of the biggest players in online business lending include On Deck Capital, that's loaned $15 billion to small businesses, and Lendio on-deck capital rates can range up to 66% depending on the creditworthiness of the business. This compares to long-term loans. This compares to long-term loans from the SBA for as low as 7%. While the online costs are significantly higher, the key advantage is small businesses can obtain needed funds quickly. One lender promises cash in as little as 4 hours. Online lenders actively approach small businesses with solicitations that promise instant cash with no or limited credit checks. The problem is that some lenders use complex structures that can include such terms as a merchant cash advance. A merchant cash advance lends money to the business. However, it is repaid from companies' debit and credit sales plus a fee. It may even allow lenders to deduct money from the business's bank account to repay the loan. Some entrepreneurs have been forced out of business due to excessive costs. The Federal Trade Commission has looked into some of the deceptive practices of online lenders and promises more regulations to protect borrowers. While online lending fills a need for small businesses, the best advice is to be careful. Know exactly what the specifics of the loan involve, repayment conditions, interest rates, prepayment penalties, and if any special conditions are included. The best advice to business borrowers is, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. Sources: Michelle Honeyegger, How to Get a Fast Business Loan, Yahoo Finance, yahoofinance.com, March 21st, 2023. Kia Treese, Best Online Business Loans 2023, Forbes, Forbes.com, February 28th, 2023. David Murrow, On Deck Small Business Loans Review, money.com, March 23rd, 2023. TJ Porter, Alternatives to Getting a Small Business Loan at a Bank, yahoo.com, March 22nd, 2023. Can72 and iStock and Getty Images Plus and Getty Images. A secured loan is backed by collateral, a tangible item of value. A car loan, for instance, is a secured loan in which the car itself is the collateral. What is the collateral in a mortgage loan? Factoring accounts receivable, one relatively expensive source of short-term funds for a firm is factoring, the process of selling accounts receivable for cash. Factoring dates as far back as 4,000 years during the days of ancient Babylon. Here's how it works. Let's say a firm sells many of its products on credit to consumers and other businesses, creating a number of accounts receivable. Some buyers may be slow in paying their bills, so a large amount of money is due the firm. A factor is a market intermediary, usually a financial institution or a factoring company, that agrees to buy the firm's accounts receivable at a discount for cash. The discount depends on the age of the accounts receivable, the nature of the business, and the condition of the economy. When it collects the accounts receivable that were originally owed to the firm, the factor keeps them or collects a fee. While factors charge more than banks' loan rates, remember many small businesses cannot qualify for a bank loan. So even though factoring is an expensive way of raising short-term funds, it is popular among small businesses. A company can often reduce its factoring cost if it agrees to reimburse the factor for slow-paying accounts, or to assume the risk for customers who don't pay at all. Remember, factoring is not a loan. It is the sale of a firm's asset, accounts receivable. Factoring is common in U.S. industries and in growing numbers of global trade ventures. Commercial paper. Commercial paper is a type of short-term financing available to large corporations that need funds for just a few months and prefer not to have. Commercial paper is a short Commercial paper is a type of short-term financing available to large corporations that need funds for just a few months and prefer not to have to negotiate with a commercial bank. Commercial paper consists of unsecured promissory notes in amounts of $100,000 and up that mature or come due in 270 days or less. Commercial paper states a fixed amount of money the business agrees to repay to the lender investor on a specific date at a Commercial paper consists of unsecured promissory notes in amounts of $100,000 and up that mature or come due in 270 days or less. Commercial paper states a fixed amount of money the business agrees to repay to the lender investor on a specific date at a specified rate of interest. Because commercial paper is unsecured, only financially stable firms, again large corporations with excellent credit reputations, are able to sell it. Commercial paper can be a quick path to short-term funds at lower interest than charged by commercial banks. Since most commercial paper matures in 30 to 90 days, it can be an investment opportunity for lenders who can't afford to put up cash for short periods to earn some interest on their money. Page 486. Credit cards. According to a survey by the Federal Reserve, a large majority of businesses that apply for a traditional business loan are rejected. Estimates are 80% of small businesses are rejected for such loans. That's why many businesses turn to short-term financing through credit cards. Credit cards provide a readily available line of credit that can save time and the likely embarrassment of being rejected for a bank loan. Even though more businesses are turning to credit cards for financing, credit cards can be extremely risky and often costly. The Credit Card Responsibility, Accountability, and Disclosure Act reduced consumer interest rates and approved many protections for consumers against card company abuses. Unfortunately, rates for small business and corporate credit cards did not fail under the protection of the law. That's why it's important to understand the penalties and perks that come with different credit cards. Some credit card perks can help keep a small business afloat. For example, Antonelli's Cheese Shop in Austin, Texas, used the cashback benefits from its Capital One Spark Plus Cash business card to offset the cost of its employees' health care. Page 487. Still, when dealing with credit cards, remember it's an expensive way to borrow money, and credit cards are probably best used very carefully. After the test prep questions, we'll look into long-term financing options. Test prep. What does an invoice containing the terms 2/10 net 30 mean? What's the difference between trade credit and a line of credit? What's the key difference between a secured and an unsecured loan? What is factoring? Obtaining long-term financing. LO 18-5. Identify and describe different sources of long-term financing. In a financial plan, forecasting determines the amount of funding the firm will need over various periods and the most appropriate sources for obtaining those funds. In setting long-term financing objectives, financial managers generally ask three questions. 1. What are our organization's long-term goals and objectives? 2. What funds do we need to achieve the firm's long-term goals and objectives? 3. What sources of long-term funding capital are available and which will best fit our needs? Firms need long-term capital to purchase expensive assets such as plant and equipment, to develop new products, or perhaps finance their expansion. In major corporations, the board of directors and top management usually make decisions about long-term financing, along with finance and accounting executives. Pfizer, one of the world's largest research-based biomedical and pharmaceutical companies, gained great acclaim and thanks when its scientists produced a successful vaccine for the COVID-19 pandemic. What you probably don't know is the company spent over $11.4 billion in 2022 researching and developing other new products. The development of a single new drug could take 10 years and cost the firm almost $2 billion before it brings in any profit. Plus, the company loses its patent protection on a drug after 20 years. It's easy to see why high-level managers make the long-term financing decisions at Pfizer. Owners of small and medium-sized businesses are almost always actively engaged in analyzing their long-term financing decisions. As we noted earlier, long-term funding comes from two major sources: debt financing and equity financing. Let's look at these sources next. Debt financing. Debt financing is borrowing money the company has a legal obligation to repay. Firms can borrow by either getting a loan from a lending institution or issuing bonds. Debt financing by borrowing from lending institutions. Long-term loans are usually due within 3 to 7 years, but may extend to 15 or 20 years. A term loan agreement is a promissory note that requires the borrower to repay the loan with interest in specified monthly or annual installments. A major advantage is that the loan interest is tax deductible. Page 488. Long-term loans are both larger and more expensive to the firm than short-term loans, since the repayment period can be quite long. Lenders assume more risk and usually require collateral, which may be real estate, machinery, equipment, company stock, and other items of value. Lenders may also require certain restrictions to force the firm to act responsibly. The interest rate is based on the adequacy of collateral, the firm's credit rating, and the general level of market interest rates. The greater the risk a lender takes in making a loan, the higher the rate of interest. This principle is known as the risk-return trade-off. Debt financing by issuing bonds. If an organization is unable to obtain its long-term financing needs by getting a loan from a lending institution such as a bank, it may try to issue bonds. To put it simply, a bond is like an IOU with a promise to repay the amount borrowed, with interest on a certain date. The terms of the agreement on a bond issue are the indenture terms discussed in Chapter 19. The types of organizations that can issue bonds include federal, state, and local governments, federal government agencies, foreign governments, and corporations. You may already be familiar with bonds. You may own investments like U.S. government savings bonds, or perhaps you volunteered your time to help a local school district pass a bond issue. If your community is building a new stadium or cultural center, it may sell bonds to finance the project. Businesses and governments compete for funds when issuing bonds. Potential investors, individuals, and institutions measure the risk of purchasing a bond against the return the bond promises to pay, the interest, and the issuer's ability to repay when promised. Like other forms of long-term debt, bonds can be secured or unsecured. A secured bond is issued with some form of collateral such as real estate, equipment, or other pledged assets. If the bond's indenture terms are violated, like for example, not paying interest payments, the bondholder can issue a claim on the collateral. An unsecured bond, called a debenture bond, is backed only by the reputation of the issuer. Investors in such bonds simply trust that the organization issuing the bond will make good on its financial commitments. Bonds are a key means of long-term financing for many governments and corporations. They can also be available investments for private individuals or institutions. Given this importance, we will discuss bonds in more depth in Chapter 19. Equity financing. If a firm cannot obtain a long-term loan from a lending institution or is unable to sell bonds to investors, it may seek equity financing. Equity financing makes funds available when the owners of the firm sell shares of ownership to outside investors in the form of stock, when they reinvest company earnings in the business, or when they obtain funds from venture capitalists. Allegiant Stadium. Justin Hartley and Alamy stock photo. The NFL is a big business, and building a new stadium requires big dollars. When the Raiders needed financing to build a state-of-the-art facility in Las Vegas, the city issued bonds that helped finance the construction of the Raiders' new home. What organizations in your community have issued bonds, and for what purpose? Equity financing by selling stock. The key thing to remember about stock is that stockholders become owners in the organization. Generally, the corporation's board of directors decides the number of shares of stock that will be offered to investors for purchase. Generally, the corporation's board of directors decides the number of shares of stock that will be Generally, the corporation's board of directors decides the number of shares of stock that will be offered to investors for purchase. The first time a company offers to sell its stock to the general public is called an initial public offering, IPO. Selling stock to the public to obtain funds is by no means easy or automatic. U.S. companies can issue stock for public purchase only if they meet requirements set by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, and various state agencies. They can offer different types of stock, such as common and preferred. We'll discuss IPOs and common and preferred stock in detail in Chapter 19, page 489. Equity financing from retained earnings. You probably remember from Chapter 17 that the profits the company keeps and reinvests in the firm are called retained earnings. Retained earnings often are a major source of long-term funds, especially for small businesses, since they often have fewer financing alternatives such as selling stock or bonds than large businesses do. However, large corporations also depend on retained earnings for needed long-term funding. In fact, retained earnings are usually the most favored source of meeting long-term capital needs. A company that uses its retained earnings saves interest payments, dividends, payments for investing in stock, and any possible underwriting fees for issuing bonds or stock. Retained earnings also create no new ownership in the firm as stock does. Joey McLeister and Star Tribune and Getty Images. Would you be willing to sacrifice your savings to start a business? That's what Dave Dinu did when he cashed out his retirement plan to purchase a franchise from 9 Round, a fitness center focused on kickboxing. Why is this financing strategy considered risky? Suppose you wanted to buy an expensive personal asset such as a new car. Ideally, you would go to your personal savings account and take out the necessary cash. No hassle, no interest. Unfortunately, few people have such large amounts of cash available. Most businesses are no different, even though they would like to finance long-term needs from operations, retained earnings. Few have the resources available to accomplish this. Equity financing from venture capital. The hardest time for a business to raise money is when it is starting up or just beginning to expand. A startup business typically has few assets and no market track record, so the chances of borrowing significant amounts of money from a bank or other lender are slim. Venture capital is money invested in new or emerging companies that some investors, venture capitalists, believe have great profit potential. Venture capital helped firms like Intel, Apple, Cisco, and Uber get started and helped Facebook and Google expand and grow. Venture capitalists invest in a company in return for part ownership and some control of the business. They expect higher than average returns and competent management performance for their investment. The venture capital industry originally began as an alternative investment vehicle for wealthy families. The Rockefeller family, for example, whose vast fortune came from John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, started in the 19th century, financed Sanford McDonald when he was operating his company from an airplane hangar. That small venture eventually grew into McDonnell Douglas, a large aerospace and defense contractor that merged with Boeing Corporation in 1997. The venture capital industry grew significantly in the 1990s, especially in high-tech centers like California's Silicon Valley, the venture capital industry grew significantly in the 1990s, especially in high-tech centers like California's Silicon Valley, where venture capitalists concentrated on internet-related companies, problems in the technology industry, and a slowdown in the economy in the early 2000s. Problems in the technology industry and a slowdown in the economy in the early 2000s reduced venture capital funding significantly. The Great Recession in 2008 caused venture capital spending to drop to new lows and did not start to recover until 2013. The shutdown of the economy during COVID-19 caused a stall in venture capital funding during the beginning of the pandemic. It recovered in 2021 and then faded again in 2022 due to economic instability. Venture capitalists seem to be paying close attention to companies advancing artificial intelligence, AI, as they did in the early days of the internet. The Adapting to Change box talks about venture capital's search for opportunities in the growing area of AI, comparing debt and equity financing. Figure 18.6 compares debt and equity financing options. Raising funds through borrowing to increase the firm's rate of return is referred to as leverage, though debt increases risk because it creates a financial obligation that must be repaid. It also enhances the firm's ability to increase profits. Recall that two key jobs of the financial manager, or CFO, are forecasting the firm's need for borrowed funds and planning how to manage these funds once they are obtained. Figure 18.6. Differences between debt and equity financing. Type of financing. Conditions, debt, equity. Conditions, management influence. Debt, there's usually none unless special conditions have been agreed on. Equity, common stockholders have voting rights. Conditions, repayment. Debt has a maturity date. Equity, stock has no maturity date. It also has principal must be repaid, which is another debt, and another form of equity for repayment is the company is never required to repay equity. Another condition is yearly obligations. Payment of interest is a contractual obligation, which is a debt of yearly obligations. And the equity of yearly obligations is the firm isn't legally liable to pay dividends. Another condition is tax benefits. Interest is tax deductible. It's a debt for tax benefits. And the equity in tax benefits is dividends are paid from after-tax income and aren't deductible. Those are types of financing. Page 490. Adapting to change. AI, future boom or future bust. San Francisco venture capital VC firm Emergence Capital was an early investor in several successful startups, including Zoom. Like other venture, like other venture, like other venture capitalist firms, it is always looking for new opportunities that will grow to be industry-defining companies. Developments in the field of artificial intelligence (AI) represent an enormous technological advance that Emergence and other major venture capital firms are carefully evaluating. With a tech downturn and blown up investments in cryptocurrencies at companies such as FTX, venture capitalists are interested but cautious. The launch of generative AI advancements such as OpenAI's ChatGPT chatbox, which is capable of answering questions with text and natural-sounding language, has led the VC rush to AI opportunities. VC firm Andreessen Horowitz led a commitment of $200 million to Chara. VC firm Andreessen Horowitz led a commitment of $200 million to Character.ai, valuing the emerging AI at over $1 billion. Startup firm Inflection AI has already received $225 billion. Startup Inflection AI has already received $225 million in VC investments. The company is seeking $675 million. Venture capitalist firms are not the only investors leading the investment march to AI. Google paid $300 million for a 10% investment in AI startup Anthropic. Microsoft has a large investment in OpenAI, and Salesforce has set aside $250 million for generative AI. The big question is, will these huge AI investments make money? Gordon Ritter, a founder of Emergence, and other leading venture capitalists are not so sure. Many feel the huge amount of capital and computer power that emerging AIs require to build foundation models is too exorbitant. Some believe the applications that will be built on top of the foundation models might be the real opportunity, similar to mobile apps that operate on mobile devices. People using the programs have also found a preponderance of errors along with undesirable responses. Such problems could be unacceptable in specific industries. Boom or bust. That's what the venture capital firms are trying to decide. Sources: skeptical investors worry whether advances in AI will make money. Financial Times, FT.com, March 6th, 2023. Brody Ford, Salesforce launches $250 million fund for generative AI startups. Yahoo News, news.yahoo.com, March 7th, 2023. Crystal H.U. and Jeffrey Daston, venture capitalists race to land the next AI deal on big tech's turf. Reuters, March 24th, 2023. Aaron Griffith and Cade Metz, AI funding frenzy escalates. The New York Times, nytimes.com, March 14th, 2023. Firms are very concerned with the cost of capital. Cost of capital is the rate of return a company must earn in order to meet the demands of its lenders and expectations of its equity holders, stockholders, or venture capitalists. If the firm's earnings are larger than the interest payments on borrowed funds, business owners can realize a higher rate of return than if they used equity financing. Figure 18.7 describes an example, again involving our restaurant example, Harvest Gold, introduced in Chapter 13. If Harvest Gold needed $200,000 in new financing, it could consider debt by selling bonds or equity through offering stock. Comparing the two options in this situation, you can see that Harvest Gold would benefit by selling bonds since the company's earnings are greater than the interest paid on borrowed funds bonds. However, if the firm's earnings were less than the interest paid on the borrowed funds bonds, Harvest Gold could lose money. It's also important to remember that bonds, like all debt, have to be repaid at a specific time. Page 491, figure 18.7. Using leverage, debt versus equity financing. Harvest Gold wants to raise $200,000 in new capital. Compare the firm's debt and equity options. Additional debt, additional equity. Individual firms must determine exactly how to balance debt and equity financing by comparing the costs and benefits of each. Leverage ratios, discussed in Chapter 17, can also give companies an industry standard for this balance to which they can compare themselves. Still, debt varies considerably among major companies and industries. Social media leaders, Meta Platforms, for example, has no long-term debt. Similarly, tech companies like Microsoft, AMD, and Alphabet have very little debt and huge piles of cash. On the other hand, Exxon has almost $40 billion in debt. Smaller oil and gas companies have over $85 billion of debt on their balance sheets. According to Standard and Poor's and Moody's investors, according to Standard and Poor's and Moody's Investors Service, firms that provide corporate and financial research, the debt of large industrial corporations and utilities typically range between 30 and 35% of the company's total assets. The amount of debt obviously varies considerably from firm to firm and industry to industry. Lessons learned from the Great Financial Crisis and Great Recession. The financial crisis that began in 2008 caused financial markets to suffer their worst fall since the Great Depression of the 1920s and 1930s. The Great Recession that followed caused further deterioration in the economy that has had a long-term impact on financial management in the United States. Millennial and Gen X workers were particularly hit hard by the Great Recession. The COVID-19 pandemic that allowed 12 years later caused further career reverberations among millennials and Gen Zers. Many laid the collapse of financial markets at the feet of financial managers for failing to do their job effectively. Poor investment decisions and risky financial dealings, especially in real estate, caused long-standing financial firms such as Lehman Brothers to close their doors. The financial meltdown led the U.S. Congress to pass sweeping financial regulatory reform. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act affected almost every aspect of the U.S. financial services industry. The government increased its involvement and intervention in financial markets and made the requirements of financial institutions and financial managers more stringent. Today, there are some who question if the Dodd-Frank Act has gone too far in financial regulation and recommend it to be amended. Still, whether the law is modified or not, the job and responsibilities of the financial manager promise to become even more challenging in the future. Financial managers have slowly regained the trust of the public. The financial crisis and Great Recession's severity called into question the integrity and good judgment of financial managers, much like events in the early 2000s. Did the integrity and judgment of the accounting industry. The financial crisis and Great Recession's severity called into question the integrity and good judgment of financial managers, much like events in the early 2000s did the integrity and judgment of the accounting industry. See Chapter 17. Chapter 19 takes a close look at securities markets as a source of securing long-term financing for businesses and as a base for investment options for private investors. You will learn how securities exchanges work, how firms issue stocks and bonds, how to choose the right investment strategy, how to buy and sell stock, where to find up-to-date information about stocks and bonds, and more. Finance takes on a new dimension when you see how you can participate in financial markets yourself. Test prep. What are the two major forms of debt financing available to a firm? How does debt financing differ from equity financing? What are the three major forms of equity financing available to a firm? What is leverage and why do firms choose to use it? Summary LO 18-1. Explain the role and responsibilities of financial managers. What are the most common ways firms fail financially? The most common financial problems are 1. Undercapitalization, 2. Poor control over cash flow, and 3. Inadequate expense control. What do financial managers do? Financial managers plan, budget, control funds, obtain funds, collect funds, conduct audits, manage taxes, and advise top management on financial matters. LO 18-2. Outline the financial planning process and explain the three key budgets in the financial plan. What are the three budgets in a financial plan? The capital budget is the spending plan for expensive assets such as property, plant, and equipment. The cash budget is the projected cash balance at the end of a given period. The operating master budget summarizes the information in the operating master budget summarizes the information in the other two budgets. It projects dollar allocations to various costs and expenses given various revenues. Page 493. LO 18-3. Explain why firms need operating funds. What are firms' major financial needs? Businesses need financing for four major tasks. 1. Managing day-by-day operations. 2. Controlling credit operations. 3. Acquiring needed inventory. And 4. Making capital expenditures. What's the difference between debt financing and equity financing? Debt financing raises funds by borrowing. Debt financing raises funds by borrowing. Equity financing raises funds from within the firm through investment of retained earnings, sale of stock to investors, or sale of part ownership to venture capitalists. What's the difference between short-term and long-term financing? Short-term financing raises funds to be repaid in less than a year, whereas long-term financing raises funds to be repaid over a longer period. LO 18-4. Identify and describe different sources of short-term financing. Why should businesses use trade credit? Trade credit is the least expensive and most convenient form of short-term financing. Businesses can buy goods today and pay for them sometime in the future. What is meant by a line of credit? A line of credit is an agreement by a bank to lend a line of credit is an agreement by a bank to lend a specified amount of money to the business at any time if the money is available. What's the difference between a secured loan and an unsecured loan? An unsecured loan has no collateral backing it. Secured loans have collateral backed by assets such as accounts receivable, inventory, or other property of value. Is factoring a form of secured loan? No, factoring means selling accounts receivable at a discounted rate to a factor, an intermediary that pays cash for those accounts and keeps the funds or charges a fee when it collects them. What's commercial paper? Commercial paper is a corporation's unsecured promissory notes maturing in 270 days or less. LO 18-5, identify and describe different sources of long-term financing. What are the major sources of long-term financing? Debt financing is the sale of bonds to investors and long-term loans from banks and other financial institutions. Equity financing is obtained through the sale of company stock, from the firm's retained earnings, or from venture capital firms. What are the two major forms of debt financing? Debt financing comes from two sources: selling bonds and borrowing from individuals, banks, and other financial institutions. Bonds can be secured by some form of collateral or can be unsecured. The same is true of loans. What's leverage, and how do firms use it? Leverage is borrowing funds to invest in expansion, major asset purchases, or research and development. Firms measure the risk of borrowing against the potential for higher profits. Page 494. Key terms: budget, capital expenditures, cash budget, cash flow forecast, cost of capital, debt financing, equity financing, factoring, finance, financial control, financial management, financial managers, leverage, line of credit, operating or master budget, promissory note, risk and return trade-off, secured loan, term loan agreement, trade credit, unsecured loan, venture capital. Critical thinking. 1. What are the primary sources of short-term funds for new business owners? What are their major sources of long-term funds? 2. Why does a financial manager need to understand accounting information if the firm has a trained accountant on its staff? 3. Why do firms generally prefer to borrow funds to obtain long-term financing rather than issue shares of stock? 4. Why is short-term financing important to businesses? Putting principles to work. Purpose: to identify which types of companies qualify for financing through the Small Business Administration. Exercise: many small business owners have a difficult time finding financing to start or expand their business. The Small Business Administration is one potential source of financing for many types of small businesses, but there are also some businesses that do not qualify for SBA loans. Go to sba.gov, search for 7A loans, and see whether the following businesses are eligible to apply for SBA financing. 1. Growing like a weed is a lawn care business that needs funding to buy additional equipment in order to expand. Does it meet SBA criteria? Why or why not? Does it meet SBA criteria? Why or why not? 2. Glamour Galore is a cosmetic company that pays sales commissions based on a system that depends on salespeople recruiting additional salespeople. It needs funding to build a marketing campaign. Does it meet SBA criteria? Why or why not? Why or why not? 3. Glory Days is a daycare center for older adults operated by a local church. It needs funding to remodel the center's kitchen and install an elevator to make the building accessible to those in wheelchairs. Does it meet SBA criteria? Why or why not? 4. Let us entertain you. Let us entertain you is a company needing funding to remodel an old warehouse to house. Let us entertain you is a company needing to funding. Let us entertain you is a company needing funding to remodel an old warehouse to house its latest vegan restaurant. Does it meet SBA criteria? Why or why not? Page 495. Developing career skills. Key: team analytic communication technology. 1. Go to your college's website and see whether its operating budget is online. If not, go to the campus library and see whether the reference librarian has a copy of your college's operating budget for the current year. Try to identify major capital expenditures your college has planned for the future. 2. One of the most difficult concepts to get across to small business owners is the need to take all the trade credit they can get. For example, the credit terms 2/10 net 30 can save businesses money if they pay their bills in the first 10 days. Work with a group of classmates to build a convincing financial argument for using trade credit. 3. Go online and check the capitalization required to open a franchise of your choice, like Subway or McDonald's. Does the franchisor offer financial assistance to prospective franchisees? Evaluate the cost of the franchise versus its business potential using the risk and return trade-off discussed in chapter. Evaluate the cost of the franchise versus its business potential using the risk and return trade-off discussed in the chapter. 4. Contact a lending officer at a local bank in your community or visit the bank's website to check the bank's policies on providing a business a line of credit. Evaluate the chances that this bank will give a small business this form of short-term loan. 5. Factoring accounts receivable is a form of financing used since the days of Babylonian King Hammurabi 4,000 years ago. Today, it's still a source of short-term funds used by small businesses. Visit 21stfinancialsolutions.com to get more in-depth information about factoring and be prepared to discuss the pros and cons of factoring to the class. Career exploration. If you are interested in pursuing a career in finance, here are a few to consider. Find out about the tasks performed, skills needed, pay, and opportunity outlook in these fields in the Occupational Outlook Handbook, OOH, at bls.gov. Financial examiner ensures compliance with laws governing financial institutions and transactions, reviews balance sheets, evaluates the risk of Financial examiner ensures compliance with laws governing financial institutions and transactions, reviews balance sheets, evaluates the risk level of loans, and assesses bank management. Tax preparer helps individual and small business clients complete and file their tax returns, assists with tax planning. Financial manager produces financial reports, directs investment activities, and develops strategies and plans for the long-term financial goals of the organization. Cost estimator collects and analyzes data in order to estimate the time, money, materials, and labor required to manufacture a product construct a building, or provide a service. Video case 1, McGraw-Hill Connect, threadless, setting video case 1, the financial design. Searching for a t-shirt that fits your personality or sends a message you think needs sending. Unfortunately, unfortunately, your favorite retailer's stock of t-shirts won't always meet your objective. You might figure it's time to give up your search and accept the traditional t-shirt designs available for sale. Will take heart, your dilemma will take heart, your dilemma could be easily solved. Will take heart, your dilemma could be easily solved. Design your vision of the perfect t-shirt and then head over to threadless.com and submit your design. At Threadless, viewers can vote on the design you present, and if your idea is a winner, the shirts will be printed and sold on the Threadless site. Page 496. Threadless is an e-commerce website founded in Chicago in 2022. Threadless is an e-commerce website founded in Chicago in 2002 by Jake Nickel. While in college, Nickel entered and won a t-shirt design contest that gave him personal recognition and satisfaction. It also prompted him to start his own online t-shirt competition to give others an equal opportunity to submit their designs. After seeing the quality of submitted designs, Nickel and his friend Jacob DeHart each invested $500 and began to print and sell winning designs. Today, Threadless sells t-shirts as well as hats, tote bags, iPhone cases, shower curtains, and other items, all designed by artists who submit Today, Threadless sells t-shirts as well as hats, tote bags, iPhone cases, shower curtains, and other items, all designed by artists who submitted designs to the Threadless website. The Threadless business model of having individuals create designs and then having viewers vote on their favorites was an early form of crowdsourcing, gathering inputs and information by obtaining the services of a large number of people. By using the crowdsourcing approach to business, the company's working capital situation was always favorable. Nickel posted winning designs and took prepaid orders for the shirts up front. He didn't send a bulk order to a printer until after he received enough orders for a particular run of shirts. The company had no need to hire employees since all the shirts were shipped to Nickel's apartment, where he, DeHart, and his girlfriend packed and shipped them to consumers. As profits began to grow, the partners decided to start printing shirts before they were sold. To do this, the company needed warehouse space for storage of finished shirts. This was the first fixed cost the company experienced. Fortunately, the firm's landlord owned several storage sites, so Threadless could expand as needed. However, any expansion in storage space increases cost, and that can drain finances. By the end of 2011, Threadless decided it needed better financial planning and hired Jason Matagange as Vice President of Finance. Matagange's experience prior to joining the firm was with a large manufacturing company. Moving to a smaller online company like Threadless was challenging for him. His primary role at the firm was to monitor finances and make certain the company was operating efficiently without hindering the company's trademark creativity. He was well aware that at a small company, it's impossible to implement every idea that surfaces due to a lack of funds. Planning and budgeting are vital at smaller firms like Threadless to ensure that expenses stay within reason as the firm attempts to expand its revenues and market share. Under Matagange's guidance, the company eliminated the cost of warehousing inventory by switching to a printing on-demand process. This new technology allows Threadless to print one shirt at a time rather than having to wait for larger orders required by the old silk screening process. Under silkscreening, the company created a silkscreen and printed large quantities of shirts that needed to be warehoused before being shipped. Today, each order is transferred to a network of suppliers that produce a specific order and ship it directly to the customer. This leads to better customer satisfaction as well as better cash flow for the company. It also permits the company to focus on its online business rather than stocking inventory. Today, 95% of the revenue earned by Threadless comes from its online business. The firm also earns additional revenue from licensing its artwork to other companies. The company has never had to rely on outside investors since its expenses are covered by sales income. Primary costs to the company today are payments to the artists and staff who maintain and market the firm's website. By improving and building online features, the company continues to improve user experiences on the website. The story of Threadless is a story of innovation and growth. Financial management is a key to keeping these objectives intact and operational. The company has focused on keeping expenses in line since its inception in 2002. Financial planning helps the firm allocate resources to the most important products the company offers and to add new products with the most market potential. Protecting the business financially without interfering with creativity is a fine line to walk, but one certainly worth walking. Thinking it over. 1. What were the major financial challenges faced by Jason Madigange when he became Vice President of Finance at Threadless? 2. Why is cash flow so important to a firm like Threadless? 3. Why hasn't the company ever needed to seek bank financing? Video case 2. McGraw-Hill Connect. Portillo's grows with an IPO. Opening a new business is both risky and challenging. Keeping that business operating efficiently over the long term doesn't get any easier. A critical area of operations vital to both large and small businesses is financial management. Financial management is the practice of handling company finances in a way that allows it to be successful. Obtaining funds to expand a business, meet unexpected challenges that occur, develop new products, or any other host of issues. Obtaining funds to expand a business, meet unexpected challenges that occur, develop new products, or any other host of issues organizations face requires careful financial planning. Page 497. Generally, the most serious financial issues occur when a business is starting out. Portillo's, a fast casual restaurant chain, started out in Chicago with very humble beginnings. Dick Portillo started the company in 1963 with just $1,100. He invested his money in a 12-foot trailer he called the Dog House. Portillo's specialized in Chicago hot dogs, Polish sausage, Italian beef, and chocolate cake. Unfortunately, he lacked any restaurant experience, and within weeks of opening his business, he almost decided to shut it down. Instead, Portillo visited other restaurants to see how they operated and learned the basic ins and outs of managing a restaurant. His perseverance and tenacity paid off big time. The Doghouse grew and blossomed. In 1967, due to a trademark challenge, Portillo changed the company name to Portillo's. By the early 1970s, Portillo's had multiple locations and demand kept growing. By the 1990s, the company's 25 stores around the Chicago area grew to over $50 million in sales. By 2021, Portillo had grown to 70 restaurants in 9 states. Company management knew it was time to make a major financial decision about the future of the company and its growth plans. Portillo's decided it was time to become a public company. A company becomes a public company when it decides to sell shares of the company's stock to the public. Through an IPO initial public offering, Portillo's offered to sell 20 million shares of its stock to the public. The IPO raised $400 million in new capital for the company. Portillo's decided to use the infusion of new funds to pay off debt and invest in the growth of the company. It plans to expand from 70 to 600 restaurants over the next decade. Raising funds by going public obviously offers Portillo's many advantages going forward. It also presents new challenges the company must face. As a public company, financial records must be made public to investors and other interested parties. Portillo's management is also under intense pressure to make good business decisions or face the wrath of shareholders. Still, company leaders feel an IPO was a good decision and will give the company more exposure and offer considerable opportunities for growth. For Portillo's, spreading the love of Chicago hot dogs remains the company's passion. Thinking it over. 1. After an IPO, does Portillo's earn money every time the company's stock is traded among investors? 2. Can Portillo's offer additional shares of stock to the public, or is it limited to what was raised in the IPO? 3. Why is it difficult for companies just starting out to obtain financing? Page 498, page 499. Notes. Chapter 19, Using Securities Markets for Financing. Chapter 19, Using Securities Markets for Financing and Investing Opportunities, page 500.